Hey, this is Troy from Planet 76. We've got some really good Sixers-focused content coming your way today. Make sure you subscribe to the pod so you can be in the know when we release new content. Enjoy the show.
Welcome, everybody, to Planet 76, episode 97. Slowly but surely approaching episode 100. We have, I guess, technically the first real episode of the off-season, because we did record last Monday, or was it Tuesday? Either way.
Monday, yeah.
And it was right off the back of a Sixers meltdown. And as we reviewed that, if you're interested, go make sure you check that out. Episode 96. But episode 97, technically, like I said, the first real off-season episode. So make sure you guys subscribe. Go follow us on Instagram, Twitter. We're on Twitter, for those that didn't know. Troy put out a tweet the other day that did pretty well, so make sure you guys go check out the Twitter. All that stuff, we're basically available everywhere, and we're just going to get right into the episode. Again, episode 97. We have some pretty decent stuff, interesting stuff to get into. Some coaching news for those that don't know. We'll get more into that. If you're a Sixers fan, I don't know how you don't know. So if you don't know, we're spoiling it. We don't care. So that's on you. So Troy, what do you got for us?
Yeah. First, I like the way you put that. First real episode of the off season. Last week wasn't too fun. Still hasn't been a great week. I don't want to say I'm getting over it, because I feel like I'm never going to get over what happened, especially with Miami's situation now, up 3-0 on Boston, and the way they're making them look. But again, sometimes we talked about last week too. Sometimes a couple games, it's just about shot making, and Celtics made a lot of shots, and the Sixers missed a lot of theirs. Sometimes it's just a really, really simple game. I had a conversation with a Heat fan a couple days ago, and I was like, it's just a really simple game sometimes. You know, Heat are making shots, Celtics aren't, and that's why they're up 3-0. But anyway, like you said, coaching, Doc Rivers was fired the day after we recorded last week. Yes. Michael's happy about that. I am pretty happy about that as well. It's a good change, I think. We posted a clip real quickly after that from the day before the episode we recorded, saying if there's someone that has to go, who is it? And we did both agree it needs to be Doc Rivers, and then not 24 hours later we got the decision. Right, our wish was granted with that, so not complaining here. But now the Sixers are looking for a new coach. We're going to talk about that on today's episode. We're going to talk about Daryl Morey's comments in his end-of-season press conference that he had on his quote to get creative if the Sixers aren't able to retain James Harden. James Harden's been in the news a lot over the last week. We're going to talk about that and talk about how much we believe or what we're supposed to do if all of this is true regarding the news surrounding James Harden. And, a lot of fun stuff to get into. Sixers have, again, they've been in the news a lot over the last week. They just have. And so there is a lot for us to talk about as we start the off-season in this episode 97 titled Decisions for the Sixers, Daryl Morey and company. So we're going to jump right into it. First thing first, Doc Rivers. Good riddance to him. And hello to the new coach, whoever that might be. What's your take or general feel? We probably talked about it a year or two ago about, okay, if Doc doesn't get us to the conference finals, he's gone. Is it that simple for you, or is it more of a James Harden had a huge influence on this? Like, what's your take on how things played out and how quickly it did after the end of the season?
Well, there was a report from Mark Stein, I believe, right before or right as the series began. Sixers Celtics, that is. Mm-hmm. Saying if the Sixers do not reach or I think it was do not get out of the second round, Doc Rivers' job could be in jeopardy, in air quotes, obviously, because not confirmed. So there seemed to have been something before that, before even the series began. There seemed to have been something planted that said, hey, we're going to make this public just to confirm it. or just to make everyone known, hey, if the Sixers fail again, Doc, you might have to hit the road, man. And that's actually exactly what happened, and I don't know how much Harden had to do with it. I don't know how much anybody had to do with it. I don't know. And it's easy to believe the reports because people have access to information that we don't. They have access to people that we don't. So it's easy to believe those reports. I'm just going to say that it was a front office decision because it just seems like the most logical, because Daryl did come out and say that basically nothing but respect for Doc, great coach, but we felt that it was time to move on in pursuit of a championship. He basically said that. That's not verbatim. He basically did say that. You can go check out Daryl Morey press conference notes. Twitter, I'm sure there's an article out there. Troy, if you have something, you can link it in the description of the episode if you want. But I am going to chalk this up to a front office decision, heavily influenced by Daryl Morey, because I think we talked about it too. He's not afraid to make tough choices, and I'm not saying this was a particularly tough choice, but Daryl Morey is not afraid of doing challenging things when it comes to decision-making, roster construction, and coach selection, coach issues. So I'm just glad he's gone. Been a year too long, in my opinion, Troy. I'm sure. I mean, I know you're pretty content with that as well. But yeah. I'm glad he's gone. I'm looking forward to seeing who the Sixers bring in, and we have some candidates here that, honestly, I wouldn't be mad at any of these guys if they were brought in. I do prefer a few over the others. But Troy, if you have any general things to add, definitely do that.
Yeah. I was just thinking while you were talking, I was thinking to myself, like, okay, if we would have, at the very beginning of the season said, okay, Sixers get knocked out in the second round, what do you think happens with Rivers? We would think he's gone.
Peace.
And that's right. We would think he's gone. And so that, to me, is an indication of the fact that James Harden probably didn't have a huge role in this, especially because he's a free agent. Right. Like, come on. Not to say that Doc was his favorite coach or anything. Like, maybe he did say, I'm definitely not coming back if he's back. Like, that's possible. But I think there's no surprise here. The coaching turnover in the NBA as a whole is simply incredible. Yeah. I think I saw a tweet. I think these are the right names. Budenholzer, Monty Williams, and Doc are those three teams that they've been on the last 3 years are the winningest teams in the NBA regular season-wise over the last 3 seasons, and none of them are on their team anymore. The turnover in the NBA is wild. It's wild.
And I think Daryl did say
the Sixers,
we don't really give the players a ton of leverage on roster moves. So, I don't know. Like I said, I'm just going to chalk it up to the front office decision. I'm going to chalk it up to Daryl Morey. And that's pretty much it, honestly.
Yeah. If you can go back to, again, the beginning of the season and say that this would happen if the results of the season were what it was, then you can likely say it's the front office decision making that. So there were, even in the press conference, I don't know if it was a question or if Daryl said that Joel was upset or surprised by this. I don't know how he can be.
Right.
Again, just he's in the NBA. He knows how it happens, and he knows what goes on, and he probably heard all season that if we don't make it past the Doc's gone. I don't know if you see anything in that Embiid is just devastated that Doc Rivers is gone. He might like him as a person, he might like him being his coach or whatever, but I don't think it's like a huge deal that someone make it out to be.
I can't imagine Embiid was too frustrated by that. I'm sure it was upsetting to him because I know him and Doc Rivers did have a solid relationship.
Sure.
Doc helped him a lot. I think, not me personally, but I think a lot of people would give Doc some credit for the player Embiid has become. I'm not going to do that, obviously, for obvious reasons.
Right.
But him and Joel did have a good relationship, so I'm sure in some way he was definitely a little bit confused by it, but still, I can't imagine he was really that angry or upset about it because, like you mentioned a few minutes ago, Joel's a smart guy. I'm sure he understood that if we underperform this year, there's a good chance Doc Rivers goes. I can't imagine Joel wasn't thinking that or hadn't thought about that at all. Which, if he did, he probably wouldn't have been upset or moved by Doc Rivers being fired.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. So I don't know why people are making a big deal about that, but people like to make a deal about anything in the offseason. That's why last episode or whatever was early offseason, whatever. Taking things just
to the extreme,
way far down a rabbit trail. But anyway, moving forward past Doc Rivers, we do have some candidates here we're going to discuss for a minute and give our thoughts on who we think might be best fit. Because it seems like it's going to be one of these names that's going to be the next head coach for the Sixers. So we have Mike Budenholzer, former coach of the Bucks. Sam Cassell, who's been on Doc Rivers' staff the last number of years. Mike D'Antoni, we know the obvious connection there, back to the Houston days with Daryl and James Harden. Nick Nurse, former coach of the Raptors. Frank Vogel, formerly with the Lakers and Pacers. And then Monty Williams, who was Sixers assistant several years ago and then was recently the coach of the Phoenix Suns. So some good names, some coach of the year guys of recent memory, some championship winning coaches, and then a Sixers assistant. Like you said, you don't particularly mind any of these guys, but you definitely prefer some over the other. I have seen that Nick Nurse has been linked to Milwaukee and Phoenix as well. I don't think anyone's surprised by that. And he's the name I would say that has kind of picked up some steam for me as far as who I want. Mm-hmm. It's been about a week since Glenn has got kicked out of here. And Nick Nurse is the one that's picked up steam. Monty Williams was, I think, my original, yes, let's get him. I think that's transferred to Nick Nurse for myself. How about your thoughts on some of these names?
I'm a big Nick Nurse fan myself. I think he's not the perfect coach for the modern NBA, but I think he's one of the more perfect coaches for the modern NBA, especially defensively. I don't think Joel Embiid has had a coach. No, I mean, Brett Brown, Doc Rivers, that's it. Brett Brown was a good defensive-minded coach, but Nick Nurse is very creative with his defensive schemes. He's very up to par with how to construct an actually good defense in the modern NBA with switching, all that kind of stuff. Joel Embiid has never played for a coach like Nick Nurse, at least defensively. So the Sixers were good defensively this year, but I think they could be even better. I think depending on the offensive load Embiid has next year, I think he could be even better defensively than he's ever been, especially under Nick Nurse. And I think Joel has had some really solid years defensively. This year he was okay. In the playoffs he was very good. But I think Joel Embiid could really have a really, really good defensive year next year if Nick Nurse becomes the head coach. And I think the Sixers defense would also look better. I don't know how much better their transition defense would be, though, because, I mean, for having Joel Embiid, he isn't the most mobile guy. It's not easy for him to really run in transition defensively. He's good at chasing down players, but I don't know how much better the Sixers' transition defense would be. I do know, though, that Nick Nurse has proven that he is, again, not the most perfect coach for the modern NBA, but one of the more creative, intelligent coaching minds, especially defensively in the modern NBA. I think he would help the Sixers out a lot.
So while you were saying that, I just Googled Frank Vogel for some reason. I don't know if you saw this, but today we're recording Monday night, and there's a rumor that Frank Vogel was on a plane today, Monday, to Philadelphia.
No. I don't like that.
So yeah, of
Live
that
reaction.
list of names, is Frank Vogel the one that scares you the most?
I did not like him with the Lakers. I thought his rotations were questionable. I did not like the way he used Russell Westbrook. Granted, it's not easy to use Russell Westbrook properly because he is a flawed player. As much of a fan of Westbrook as I am, he's a flawed player, but still Frank Vogel didn't really do a great job integrating him. I just didn't really think Frank Vogel was a great coach. I don't think he is. I don't think he's what the Sixers need. I think he's kind of an older mind. I think the Sixers need somebody who is more willing to take risks to optimize the roster, optimize offense or defense or both. I think Nick Nurse is that guy. Like I said, creative mind. He's not afraid to take risks, especially defensively. He's very up to par with what works in the modern NBA, what doesn't. He makes adjustments, which is something new that the Sixers haven't had in a while. I think Frank Vogel also has some of the same issues Doc Rivers has with adjustments.
Mm-hmm.
That's the last thing the Sixers need, is another coach that does that. So I am not on the Frank Vogel train. I'm waiting at the station for some other train to come in.
Yes, and I agree with that. But yeah, interesting to hear that he might have had a meeting with the Sixers today or tomorrow. I think the word was Nick Nurse was supposed to meet with the Sixers this week as well. Seems like a lot of these teams are linked to the same names. The Bucks are linked to Monty Williams. And we'll see what happens there. Budenholzer, not sure who else he's being linked to, but it seems like out of these, the one with the most interviews may just be Nick Nurse, if I had to guess. Again, with Phoenix and Milwaukee, we know as well are interested, and obviously those are three talented teams: the Bucks, the Sixers, and the Suns, who are going after Nick Nurse a little bit. So, one name we haven't touched on as much in that list right there, though, is Sam Cassell. Is it a good thing or a bad thing that he's been there? Obviously the good news is that familiarity in the locker room. The bad news is he was with Doc Rivers, so there might be some similar stuff. What's your take on the potential of Sam Cassell being the hire?
I would also like Sam Cassell to be the head coach. I think you kind of alluded to it a little bit, but him already having a good relationship with the players, especially guys like Tyrese Maxey, is huge. Having your players, what's the word I'm looking for? Being able to connect with your players and having them buy into your coaching is huge. And I feel like that was an issue with Doc Rivers. I feel like James Harden, for a great example, he said after the game on last Sunday about Doc Rivers and his relationship, our relationship is okay. I don't know that Harden really bought into Doc Rivers, and that's not good. That's not a good thing. Your players need to want to play for your coach, and if that doesn't happen, your team isn't going to always look great. So I feel like with Sam Cassell already being in the locker room, like you said, having a relationship with these guys like Tyrese Maxey, James Harden, if he returns, obviously, huge question mark there, is huge. It's really big. You want your players to be on board with your decision-making, with your game plan, with what you want to do, and at the same time, you, as a player, I would imagine, some guys don't care about being coached, I get that, but as a player, I'd imagine you want a good coach, a guy that you can listen to, a guy that actually wants to put you in the best positions. I feel like Sam Cassell can do that for this team, so I would also like Sam Cassell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's an interesting one. I think, a lot of people talk about the risk of a guy that hasn't been a head coach before, but you see it all the time where guys that don't have a ton of experience are doing well early on in their head coaching career. And, even these guys that we've just mentioned, I know the turnover in the NBA as far as head coaching, positions is just insane, but there's reasons that the guys like Mike Budenholzer, Nick Nurse, Frank Vogel, why they're not, Monty Williams, why they're not in the positions that they held. There's reasons for it. Not that they were necessarily all the problem. I saw some articles today that said Monty Williams wasn't the problem.
I do agree with that.
In Phoenix. But there are reasons that they're not in those positions. So I guess real quick, I think you did put a list out as far as your rankings or preference on these guys. I don't know if it's changed or what, but do you have, of those 5-6 names, what would be your order of preference? Do you have that handy?
Yeah, I know that Nick Nurse would be my number one choice. I would, if he was hired, I'd feel the most confident about that hire if it was Nick Nurse. Second and third,
Agreed.
I would be okay with Mike D'Antoni. I like his offensive philosophies. I think he is also a very creative mind when it comes to coaching. I know he's a bit older, but I still think you can work with... There's a foundation there because Mike D'Antoni with Houston, with Phoenix, I still think there's a foundation there, and he was huge in that in Phoenix with Steve Nash, in Houston with James Harden, working with Daryl Morey, and then they would be back again. I feel like even if Harden does leave, the Sixers with Mike D'Antoni could their offense could look a lot better than it did this year, and their offense was good. They led the league in 3-point percentage. I still...
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I'd like to see them take more threes. I think Mike D'Antoni can help with that. And I mentioned that in my post a few days ago. I think it was last Wednesday now. This Sixers team could be a lot more fast-paced, even though they do have Joel Embiid. I still think Mike D'Antoni could also help with that, with pace, with shooting more threes.
I'd like to guess, while you're still talking about him, I'd like to guess that D'Antoni would help with spacing. I really don't know. But is that
100%.
what you would think,
definitely.
too? Yeah.
Like I said,
because that was an issue in the playoffs.
Obviously, the floor is a lot more spaced out because there wasn't a big who needed the ball. And I'm not saying that to slight Embiid. Like, ball dominance in the NBA isn't necessarily a bad thing because some players are really great if they have the ball in their hands. Joel Embiid is one of them. Like, he needs the ball, but it's not in a negative connotation because that's where he's at his best.
Right. Right, and then who else?
Oh, yeah.
So is Vogel the bottom
Vogel
of the list?
is not on the list. He's not even on the
Vogel's
list.
not on the list.
He's
on the plane, but he ain't on the list.
I'd put a few other guys not even in the mention of the Sixers' vacant head coaching spot before him. But my third...
Do you have Monty over Budenholzer?
I do. I think my top four is pretty comfortably Nick Nurse, Mike D'Antoni, Sam Cassell, Monty Williams.
Okay. I agree with that. Yeah.
And for the same reasons you mentioned Monty Williams, too. He was here, was a little while ago now, but he was here. Very good coach, as we've seen in Phoenix, and I do agree.
Sure.
I don't know if you said, but I don't think he was the issue in Phoenix. That's a whole other topic for another time, maybe. But I would like Monty Williams as well. Not a huge fan of Mike Budenholzer.
Yeah.
So he's probably off my top 5, honestly.
Yeah. He's 5th.
Yeah, or top 4, yeah.
All right.
Cool.
All right. So, lot of stuff there, and we'll see. I don't know how fast it's going to move, but some of these teams are going to land some guys soon. But speaking of another guy that we're not sure where he's going to land, and this is going to be the rest of the episode, I think, is James Harden. A lot of talk there, so I'll catch some people up to speed, or just remind them of what's transpired over the last 7-8 days, and then we'll go back and forth on what we have to say about these rumors and what we believe too. So, post game, Game 7, I think it was right after that game, he said in a question maybe relating to the team or relating to specifically he and Joel Embiid, he said, "Yeah, it's only technically really year 1 for us, as his teammates, since he came at the end of the previous season in February." So that was like, okay, that's interesting because maybe he's alluding to the fact that there's going to be another year. And then a day or two after the end of the season, we see Harden express that he's very interested, or rumor is that he's very interested in a return to Houston. And then as of 3 days ago, again, this all transpired in a week. As of 3 days ago, Harden is quote unquote expected to return to Houston, and then there's a number thrown out. We don't know all the sources and where all this comes from, but there's a number thrown out that he's apparently seeking a 4-year deal worth $200 million, big ones. $200 million, 4 years for James Harden. Okay, and I think that covers the big ones as far as the rumors around this guy over the last week. Your thoughts on all of that, or even just a piece of that before we break down everything?
I mean, I will keep this fairly brief because one thing is we don't know everything yet. And also, this is something that if he does end up leaving, we could talk about this for an entire episode. There is a lot to unpack with James Harden. Not only his tenure with the Sixers, but just everything surrounding him since he's been here. But what I will say is, if he really wants that money, the Sixers should absolutely not give him that money. I don't know. I get it, advocating for yourself in the NBA. I understand that. But I don't know I hope he doesn't. I hope he doesn't think the Sixers are going to give him that. I hope they don't give him that. I think Daryl Morey is a little more rational. I know him and Harden are good friends, but I'd like to think Morey is rational enough to realize, dude, we're not giving you $50 million a year for 4 years when you're 38 or however old you are. We don't. That's not what this team needs. I know Daryl Morey is smart. I do have confidence in him to kind of look past whatever bias he may have for James Harden. But what I will say is, yeah, the Sixers should not give him that money. That is way too much money. And I don't even know if the Sixers have that money. I don't even know if they can give him that money. If they can, they shouldn't. Either way.
I think they can. I think they can, yeah.
It's crazy.
It's crazy, again, to see all that's transpired over the last week. It's also crazy to see the thought amongst multiple people is that he's expected to return to Houston. And that very well could be true. It might not be true, like you said. But obviously that's going to speak to a couple things because he's spoken quite often in the last year and 3 months since he's been here about wanting to be on a team that competes for a championship. He did take less money, this past off season, and that it all looked really, really good. We're all team James Harden because he did that. And then you see stuff like this about he's potentially chasing the bag. You care to speak on that? If that's true.
And like I said, I definitely could go really into this. So I will keep this brief for now because if James Harden does end up leaving, we could easily do a whole episode on that. So I will say is yes, I agree with everything you said. I don't know why Harden would want to go to Houston other than the money. Because he did say he wants to win a championship. He's not doing that in Houston. He did say he wants to be... He said the Sixers were his first choice leaving Houston 2 years ago.
Right.
What would change in his mind? I literally have no idea. But if he does want to go to Houston, I don't care what changed. The fact that you want to go back to Houston and just rot your career away, battling for the 11th seed in the Western Conference, just do it. I just don't get that. It's nuts.
Yeah. Yep, that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Short, sweet, to the point. Yeah, I mean,
I
would have a lot
to
say
this
as
is
well.
Easily an entire episode, you know?
Yeah, it is. It is. If all this is true, if he's really seeking this huge contract and he's going back to Houston, or imagine if it comes out that he ends up in Houston and Sixers offered him maybe not quite that much, but a lot, and he still turned it down. That would speak volumes to me as well.
Definitely.
But yeah, so the reason we talk about that, and I think what we want to explore now is if that's true, what's it mean for the Sixers? And so Daryl Morey, in that same conference we talked about earlier, he is quoted as saying this. He said, "Scenario A would be to bring back James Harden, right? I mean, you're pretty much going to be the same core group of guys on this team, and you're gonna run it back with this crew. That's scenario A. Scenario B," he said, is if he's not back, being James Harden, if he's not back, we're gonna have to get creative, quote, and we feel good about the tools available to us if that happens. What does Daryl Morey mean by get creative?
He is a mastermind, so it's not easy to predict what he's going to do. It hasn't been ever since he got here. Nobody thought he was going to flip Josh Richardson for Seth Curry. Nobody thought he was going to do that. Nobody even thought that was possible. So I don't know what he's going to do. I imagine he's got something. He's had 6 months to think about it, and then he's going to have another month-ish to think about it again, even more. He's a smart guy. Like I said, I have had zero issue with what Daryl has done since he's gotten here, except for trade for George Hill a couple years ago. But other than that, I've had zero issue with what he's done. He's always had the best interest of Joel Embiid in this franchise in mind. So I believe, I am a believer in Daryl Morey. Hopefully he Hopefully he's got something, because the Sixers have no trade assets. They have basically no picks. They have almost no salary. I don't know.
Well, that's what's interesting. Right. That's what's interesting here is because he says, well, I have to get creative. And he says he feels good about the, quote, tools available to get creative. What tools are available? You have Tobias Harris on one more year of a crazy contract. You know, he talks about Maxey like he's staying forever. There's no other tools. We don't have draft picks. Joel Embiid, and speaking of Joel Embiid, people need to stop talking about Joel Embiid getting traded. I texted you this week. I was like, dude, it's really driving me crazy. That was what I tweeted about. I was like, that's just not going to happen. Can we stop? Can we please stop? Can we please stop? Anyway, I don't know what Daryl could possibly have up his sleeve. You see a lot of people wishful thinking. I think you talked about it too with the possibility, I don't even want to call it possibility, of Damian Lillard, and how far-fetched that is because of what they'd have to give up to get him. I don't know what tools he's talking about, and I'm a little, I guess, concerned that, if you don't retain James Harden, then how do you compete for a championship? I'm not saying, again, Sixers were doing just fine post Ben Simmons, pre James Harden, but they weren't going to compete for a championship. That's why they went and got James Harden to hopefully do that. But now, what do you do if you can't keep James Harden and you can't really go get another big name? It's pretty tough, and I think that's why some out there are saying, not that you agree with it, obviously, not that I agree with it, that you keep James Harden no matter what because he's your best chance to put out a contending team. So regardless of the money, you put out a contending team, and the best way to do that is by keeping James Harden in some way, shape, or form. I don't know how it would play out. It might not even be an off-season move. We might roll into next season without James Harden and with Maxey, Melton, Harris, Tucker, Embiid, and some guys that we are familiar with off the bench, and then approaching the deadline, if we're a star away from making some noise, you make a move, or I don't know.
That's why it's like this Harden domino has to fall really before anything else happens. Like, this is kind of the opening of the floodgates, because when we know what happens with Harden, we can kind of have a somewhat small idea of what's going to happen with the rest of the team, because a lot of this offseason hinges on what happens with James Harden, because the Sixers can't really proceed until they have this situation squared away, and that can't happen for another month because of free agency, unless there's a confirmation that Harden is going to leave or whatever he's going to do.
So
it's tough.
It is tough. And are we wrong? Are we wrong to say that without James Harden and without a significant piece coming in, this team is not competing for a championship?
I would not be confident in their contender status entering next season. I don't know how much bigger of a leap Maxey's going to take. Will he become an all-star? Will he be borderline all-NBA? I don't know. That's a little too early still to talk about that.
Yeah.
But it's like I said, this Harden domino really needs to fall, because once it does, we can get a much better understanding of the current landscape of this team, of this roster, of this franchise.
It's like, you're right. Once this domino falls, well, okay. Everybody take a deep breath. This is where we're at. This is what happened. James Harden's with us or James Harden's not, and now we have to proceed. But again, if all that's true, it's hard though, because again, if you pay James Harden that money, you still have a legitimate chance of being a really, really good team in this league. But if you don't, you might not, and that's where Daryl's going to have to make a decision as to, okay, how confident am I that my scenario B is gonna leave us in a position where we can contend?
Yeah.
And I don't see how it can happen, but again, I'm not Daryl Morey.
I do not envy that man.
Yeah.
At all.
That's a tough spot to be in.
Decision making.
That's a tough spot to be in. And again, what we do know is the answer isn't to trade Joel Embiid and rebuild and restart the process.
Definitely not. Back to the Stone Age.
Yes, goodness, 10-win season age. We don't want to go back there.
No.
You know, we're
come so far.
We're right where we need to be. And again, like we talked about last week, you know, I wonder if the same people who are saying you need to keep James Harden to stay a contender are the same people who were saying last week to blow it up. Like,
I wonder.
You know,
Planet 76 conspiracy.
Sixers went Game 7 with Boston, and then just, you know, Game 6 had a chance to close it out with 4 minutes left and couldn't make a shot. It's a simple game. I said it earlier. So, man, okay, all right. Regardless of money, though, do you want James Harden back if money weren't an issue?
If he didn't want $50 million, yeah.
Yeah.
I wouldn't mind him back.
Yeah. Because again, I don't know the logistics of some of the stuff. Like I saw some people saying, "Oh, just do a sign and trade and go get, you know, whoever."
I don't want anybody from the Rockets.
Right.
Unless it's Jabari Smith, but I'm sorry, not the Raptors. Hold on. The Rockets wouldn't trade him.
Yeah. The domino has to fall.
Land. That's the title of the episode is No Man's Land.
No Man's Land.
That's it.
The domino has to fall. You hit the nail on the head with that one. Anything else? James Harden, Daryl Morey, coaching search, coaching situation. Again, this is episode 97. Anything else?
Nothing right now, but you know, a lot of what I say next is up to what James Harden does for in what is it, May 20 something in a few weeks, a month.
Yeah. Hold on to your hats, because it's going to be a while before we get a decision there. But as we've mentioned, if James Harden's gone, and I'll close with this, if James Harden is gone, this team, before James Harden came in a year ago, was doing all right. And so the interesting thought there is, okay, the team was doing all right, but they weren't in title contention area or title contention zone, whatever you want to call it. And so maybe it doesn't happen in the offseason. Maybe somewhere in the middle of the season they go and get somebody that can make them a contender because they're on the cusp of being one. But we don't know. And we're not going to know for a while, so I'm going to try not to lose sleep over it. And you're going to try not to lose sleep over it. And again, that's episode 97, decisions for the 76ers, as we break it all down on Planet 76. And we will see you next time to talk about more of the same stuff about the coach and James Harden and the decisions that are coming up. We'll see you next time. If you are a Philadelphia 76ers fan, this is the podcast for you. Planet 76, a weekly podcast covering all things Philadelphia 76ers. We'll see you next time.